Welcome.
I'm Cavan Scott, one of the story architects of Star Wars The High Republic.
This is Dominic Pace, who plays Gekko the Bounty Hunter from The Mandalorian.
Hi, I'm Claudia Gray. I write Star Wars books.
And you're listening.
And you are listening
to Star Wars Comics in Canon. The Force is strong with this one.
Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And so brings episode 96. So my friends, this week I am tackling the High Republic mini-series called Trail of Shadows. So where does this sit in the timeline? Well, it is in the first phase of the High Republic. It is in the third wave of the High Republic. So the first issue is directly after Cavan Scott's book, The Rising Storm, and the last two issues take place around the time of The Fallen Star. There is a bit of a time jump between issues 1 and 2, but I would recommend, if you don't already know the plot of Fallen Star or generally what happens in the third wave of the first phase of the High Republic, to proceed with caution, because this is basically going to spoil what happens in The Fallen Star to a degree. But obviously it gets mentioned in the end of the High Republic comics by Marvel, also written by Cavan Scott, and other pieces of media set around this time, the Eye of the Storm as well. They all speak about what happens here. So you're going to know what happens. Even the cover of issue 5 of Trail of Shadows clearly shows what happens. But I'm just going to pre-warn you now to say that will get spoiled. And I will say that any new listeners, I'm going to go through each of the comics. I'm going to go through the plot details of them. And I'm also going to talk about certain connections made to other content and how it connects to the wider galaxy and giving information on other things as well. But before we delve into those things, let's just give you some information on the comic itself. So, there are 5 issues of Trail of Shadows. Issue number 1 was released October 13th, 2021. Issue 5 was released February 9th, 2022. And the trade paperback collection was released April 12th, 2022. The writer of these is Daniel José Older, the artist is David Wachter, and the colour artist is Giada Marchisio. Now, Daniel José Older, he wrote the High Republic Adventures comics published by IDW Publishing, which I have tackled on this very show, and he also wrote the book Race to Crashpoint Tower, which is a junior novel. So there are characters that appear in this episode / these comics that also appear elsewhere. Now, if you're listening on YouTube, it's very easy just to go into the High Republic playlist and you can check out all of the High Republic content, because after this episode, I only need to do 3 more episodes and I have tackled all High Republic content that is currently out for Phase 1. And that means that the next couple episodes, I'm going to do the Edge of Balance manga. There's 2 mangas of those, or 2 volumes of that manga. I'm going to be tackling them maybe next week, maybe in a couple weeks' time. And then I've also got the Mission to Disaster and the Midnight Horizon books that I will need to do book reviews on this show as well at some point. Midnight Horizon is a young adult novel also written by Daniel José Older, so it's going to be the last piece of High Republic content I tackle on the show until we get to like October time when Phase 2 starts. But I'll get into that a little bit at the end. However, I will note that if you haven't already checked out previous episodes of the High Republic comics or High Republic Adventures, please check out episodes 84, 88 and 92 for the High Republic Marvel run, and please check out episodes 86, 90 and 93 for the High Republic Adventures comics by Daniel José Older. But as I said, just go through the back catalogue of Comics in Motion if you're listening on a podcast app, or if you're listening on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and also go into the playlists there. But with that all in mind, let's get into issue number 1. So interestingly enough, issue 1 doesn't have a crawl to it. This is, I think, one of the first comics I've tackled that doesn't have some sort of crawl or a bit of text to kind of elaborate what's going on, so there isn't one. So just delving straight in, this takes place just after the Rising Storm on the planet Grizzle. And to clarify, the Rising Storm and the Fallen Star are somewhat going to get spoiled for me going through this, even the next few words I speak, so that is your final spoiler warning. But it starts off with seeing Loden Greatstorm's calcified corpse that slowly melts into the rain. We're introduced to a character called Emerick Caphtor. Now, he's actually first seen in the book Out of the Shadows, sort of chronologically speaking, but he doesn't have a major role in that. This is where he is mainly known about. He's on a temple in Coruscant and is speaking with Stellan Gios, and Stellan keeps singing this old nursery rhyme. Now, Emerick Caphtor, he is also like an investigator for the Jedi. He's one of the leading investigators for the Jedi, which is why he got selected for this job, to kind of investigate what is going on? How on earth were the Jedi turned to stone, in essence, or calcified as they call it? What is the thing that's doing this? Because at this point, and even at the end of The Fallen Star, they don't really know what's causing all this. The Fallen Star gives some more insight into the Jedi as to what's going on. It's clear there's some sort of beings that are causing this. But by the end of this, you do get a bit more information. So if you're really intrigued by the Leveler or the Nameless, these beings that absorb Force energy and turn their victims to stone, this is the comic run that you want to read. Obviously, you can keep listening to this episode and I'll generally tell you what is said. And there's a couple of parts I'm going to read out. But if you want the in-depth explanation, this, as well as the 2-part series Eye of the Storm, which I tackled 2 episodes ago in episode 94 of Star Wars Comics in Canon, this and also that are both probably the best places to find information, especially if you've already read The Fallen Star and The Rising Storm. So Emerick notes that the analysis of Loden's remains don't actually identify as Loden Greatstorm. There's no midichlorians in there's no DNA or anything that identifies it. But Emerick notes that Stellan has been shaken up by this instance and is quite desperate. Meanwhile, it cuts to the other main character of this run, which is Sian Holt, which I think is Sian. It's Sianholt. I believe it's pronounced Sian, which is what I'm going to pronounce it as. Apologies if that's not the intention, Daniel José Older. But Sian Holt is on level 1347 of Coruscant. I just like saying that because Coruscant has thousands upon thousands of levels, and generally the further down you go is generally the less money people have, like the lower economic classes in general. It's more so just if you're on planet side, you're generally considered rich. Obviously, Jedi temples there, politicians, etc., etc. But Sian is following someone who is a partner of hers, as in a partner of being a private investigator, who seems to be doing some dodgy dealing. She's following and she's having a little monologue to herself saying that, he was quite troubled, but then he said he was going straight and she was going to help him and things, but it seems like he may have fallen into old habits. So she tracks him into this alleyway, and then it cuts back to Emerick. Emerick is with his droid who's called Q2. Now Q2 looks a little bit like BD1 from the Jedi Fallen Order game that also appears in the 2020 run of Afra Comics. So it's like a square-ish head, looks a little bit like Wally, but Q2, Emerick's droid, is a bit bigger than the BD units. He kind of is similar to the droids that are found on Kamino. In the Bad Batch, you see them in the Clone Wars, and the droid that kind of befriends Omega in Bad Batch is called AZ. Well, he's AZ and then he's got like loads of numbers after his name, but kind of like a cross between Wally, AZ and BD1 is what Q2 looks like, and Q2 kind of sits on Emerick's shoulder. It's almost like if you have a human that doesn't have any legs and it's holding on to someone's shoulder using just their hands and their head is above their shoulders, that's kind of what Q2 looks like, and that's how Q2 sits on Emerick. The droid mentions that Emerick is now humming to himself that rhyme that also Stellan Gios was humming. It appears that the language in this nursery rhyme isn't actually real. There's then a short flashback which shows some younglings trying to sleep, and you've got this woman who's part of the Jedi Order who's really old, singing this old nursery rhyme, and it used to freak out Emerick and some of the younglings at the time, but it's seemingly just a nursery rhyme. So back to Sian. She's talking to her partner who's called Branto, and his associate that he entered the alleyway with is gone. He then tells them just they need to run. Back to Emerick, he gears up with a squad of Republic troops to go and investigate the next thing. Stellan mentions that the rhyme ends with the word dust, which is quite ominous and peculiar. And back to Sian, Branto's associate is then shot by a Tarnab. So a Tarnab is a species from the planet Tarn. They have triangular skulls, horns, and brownish blackish skin. There's a character in the High Republic, which is Grandmaster Pra-Tree Vita, and he is also a Tarnab. I believe I've mentioned him in prior episodes at least once, I think. And then there was also a senator at the time of the Clone Wars who was called Mot Notrab, and they were in the Phantom Menace and the Clone Wars. So Tarnabs do show up in the Phantom Menace, in the Clone Wars series, Revenge of the Sith, Attack of the Clones, so they're a prequel era species. And they were first shown in the Phantom Menace, but they're also in a couple of Legends bits of content in that sort of short period of time between the prequels and the Disney canon reset. So Tarnabs are mentioned in the Darth Plagueis novel and the Cloak of Deception novel, which I think both of them are written by James Luceno. And in Legends, it's confirmed that their heights on average are about 2.3 meters tall. That's not been explicitly confirmed in canon, but this Tarnab in question is very tall, so that seems to be correct. I would also like to note here that if you want to hear my thoughts on Darth Plagueis, you get some spoiler-free thoughts, and then towards the end you will hear some spoilerific thoughts as well as a general overview of the plot of Darth Plagueis. Then please consider checking out my Patreon at patreon.com/genuine Chit-Chat. On there I record and release Star Wars book reviews that I don't release on this feed or on my YouTube channel, and there's been some Canon books including A New Dawn, which is the Rebels prequel, Last Shot by Daniel José Older, which is about Han Solo and Lando after Episode 6, and also Dark Disciple, which is by Christy Golden, and that is a Clone Wars era novel about Quinlan Vos and Asajj Ventress. I've tackled those, and I've also tackled some Legends books, which are Darth Plagueis, Shatterpoint, which features Mace Windu around the Clone Wars era, and I've just recorded my review for the first of the Darth Bane books. I'm also listening to the audiobook of Brotherhood by Mike Chen, and I will be releasing a review of that on there too. So if you want to hear more book reviewy things, and you want to get another even further wider understanding of the Star Wars canon and the books without having to read all of these books and things, please consider checking out my Patreon. For only £1 a month, you get access to all of these pieces of audio content, as well as at least one episode of Afterthoughts every week I do with my girlfriend Megan, and just there's loads of additional content, early access to stuff, and you get to support the show. So please consider checking out patreon.com/genuine Chit-Chat. A link will be in the description. But back to the story. So I just explained about Tarnabs, so we continue the story, and we're back to Emerick. He heads to a planet called Vrant Tarnum. Now, Vrant Tarnum is only in the High Republic. It was shown in the High Republic Adventures. It was in the first volume of that I tackled back in episode 86 of Comics and Canon. Obviously, if you're on YouTube, you can just find it in the playlist. And Yoda and Elder Tromac go there to try and find out some information about these artifacts, and then they crash land there. And that's where Yoda gets stranded, and why Yoda doesn't appear in the rest of the High Republic, aside from in the first few bits and pieces of Phase 1, Wave 1, because he's just disappeared and lost on this planet. And as far as I can tell, he has not yet been recovered. I think that in Midnight Horizon, he may end up coming back, only on the basis that I heard Yoda's name mentioned when someone was talking about Midnight Horizon, so I can only presume he pops up again right at the very end of this phase of the High Republic, but I'll confirm that in my Midnight Horizon book review once I've read it. And also as confirmed in The Eye of the Storm, and also in that High Republic Adventures comic I mentioned, Marchion Rogue got his special staff there that he uses to control the Levelers / the Nameless. The one of them was called the Leveler, and then when he gets numerous of them, the species are called the Nameless. So I'm probably just going to call them the Nameless from here on in this specific episode, but yeah, that's where you get the information about those. So Emerick gets to Vrant Tarnum, he fights with some Nihil, and as I said, he has some Republic troops there, and meanwhile, Shan's friend gets shot in this alleyway. She falls to the ground after being shot in the hand, but she manages to shoot the Tarnab that is looming over her, about to deal the killing blow. Back to Emerick, after disposing of all of those Nihil, either capturing them or killing them or whatever, then he gets to some ruins. Now, the ruins he gets to, his droid Q2 then scans some of the writing on the wall, and it's confirmed that the nursery rhyme, which he's been humming and also Stellan Gios has been singing, the lyrics to that have been written on there. Then back to Shan, after she shoots that Tarnab, she then passes out, and the final comment on issue 1 is that everything is connected, which is something that Emerick says to his droid Q2 quite frequently. So we move on to issue number 2. Now there is a crawl for issue 2, but the crawl for this issue and the subsequent issues are just a recap of the prior issue, so I'm not going to read the crawls for any of these. It's confirmed that it may have been weeks after issue 1 or even months after issue 1, but Emerick has been just pondering and trying to work out all of these bits of information about the nursery rhyme, how that connects to Load of Great Storm and the Nihil and all these things. And Emerick is pondering, but he says there's just too many threads to grasp on what's going on, and he doesn't even really know how long he's been investigating this, hence the weeks or months thing. I think it has been months because the general loose idea is each main book in the High Republic, each sort of phase, seems to be around 6 months-ish, 6 to 8 months after the previous one. So the 3 High Republic waves within the first phase seem to take place over a year and a half to maybe 2 years-ish. That's kind of the general idea, but once again, Star Wars are never explicit about the timelines of things, unless you're in the Skywalker saga, dealing with like Kenobi, because it seems like Kenobi's timeline is pretty well set out. But anyway. So then shows what Shan is doing, and she is struggling to play an instrument that she often plays. The instrument seems to be like a keyboard or a piano. I couldn't find confirmation online of what it was specifically called. I did find a few other instruments that are very similar, like the water organ, which it could be, but she also calls it keys, I think in issue 4 or 5, which obviously would allude to it being a keyboard, because that's what you call an abbreviation of a keyboard is keys. So it's a keyboard, it's a piano, it's a water organ. I don't know, but it's very similar to a piano, so I'm kind of going to reference it as a piano going here. But Sian is finding it hard to play these things. She said obviously being shot in the hand hindered this, but it's mainly the fear that is actually causing her problems after the assault in the alleyway. And when it shows the first page or two of this comic, it's got some very, very nice artwork where you see in the top half of the 2 pages is Emerick and the bottom half of the 2 pages is Sian. And then the end of that double page spread on the right hand side, there is a droid that comms to each of them saying the same thing. So they're both being summoned, that Lina So, the current Chancellor of the Republic, wants to see them. So Emerick reports to Lina So, who then calls in Sian, and there's a person there who makes a comment who's Gia Staros. Now that may mean nothing to you, and that's okay, but Gia Staros is the mother of Avon Staros, who's one of the main characters in the A Test of Courage book, which is a junior novel by Justina Ireland, which I've tackled on this channel, and they are also the ancestors of Sana Staros, who is a very prominent character in the main run of Star Wars comics, and then in the 2020 run of Dr. Aphra comics. And Sana Staros is a badass. She is very, very cool, and any of the Staros characters are very interesting. But the reason I specifically highlight Gira Staros in this instance was because Gira actually features surprisingly heavily in the Fallen Star book. She does appear a little bit elsewhere, but the Fallen Star book and the Eye of the Storm comics, I believe, also mention them too. But the Fallen Star book is the main place you'll find information on how she's involved with the Nihil. And throughout this comic, there's mentions of someone in Lina So's close circle is reporting to the Nihil, and no one really knows why or how, and it's Gia Staros, and you find that out in the Fallen Star. But anyway, Emerick goes into the room and talks to Lina So, and she calls in Sian. Now, the reason that they want to connect them is because their incidents may be related. They go on to say that the Tarnab that they saw was a person called Arathab Fal. They're trying to sell a weapon that he claims to be Nihil. It then shows a planet called Vorzid V, and Arathab grabs a Powan after breaking down his door. The Powan asks to legitimize the merchandise that Arathab is selling, and Arathab calls in his boss that looks a little bit like a Nihil. Now, a Powan is someone who's from Utapau. They're same species as the Grand Inquisitor, they are tall, their skin is lined, and they're seen in Revenge of the Sith. You specifically see them when Obi-Wan Kenobi goes to Utapau and lands and talks to that tall gentleman with the characteristics I just described. They are Powans. Also living in Utapau are the Utai. Now, when Obi-Wan's starfighter gets repaired and things, you see some shorter creatures fixing up his starship, and those are the Utai. So you've got the Utai are kind of the lower level species, and the Powans are more so the advanced species, in air quotes. That's kind of how their society acts. I'm not going to delve into the whole society of Utapau because it's complicated and stuff, but I thought I'd elaborate on that. So cutting away from Arathab and his dodgy dealings trying to sell this crazy strange weapon, Sian and Emerick then start talking. Emerick says that they're on completely different missions, and she's a little bit taken aback by that because she's trying to work with him and he's not really being very receptive to it. And she confirms that she doesn't want Arathab to get a second chance to kill her, so she is somewhat personally invested, but also there seems to be more here afoot. Sian then tells Emerick to change out of his standard Jedi clothing because he's just going to stick out like a sore thumb, and so he goes and gets changed into some normal clothes. Meanwhile, you've got Arathab, who says into some comlink that the Nihil have found them, and then he sees a police car and seems quite jittery. So although it is alluded to that this Arathab person is dealing on behalf of the Nihil, and when he seems to attack people, he gets people who are dressed similarly to the Nihil, it seems like he's some sort of fraud in some way, and he's trying to actually escape the Nihil in some ways. But that little thread will be explained further on. So back to the investigative duo. They get to a crime scene and they kind of show off to each other knowing what they know. So one of them's like, oh, well, it clearly couldn't be just a simple break-in and theft because of this thing. Oh, yes, and there's various species blood splattered over the walls. Yes, of course. And then also, look, there are blaster bots from here, here, and here. So it's kind of like that NCIS, CSI, crime scene stuff. It's kind of probably a little nod to that, but also it seems like Emerick and Sian are both trying to kind of one-up each other a little bit. You get back to Arathab, who is fighting off some Nihil, and then it shows that this duo then appear while he's fighting off the Nihil, and Emerick has got a yellow lightsaber. I thought I'd highlight that because that generally is considered quite a neutral colour in Star Wars. So in the Skywalker saga, you don't really see any characters, apart from Rey right at the very end of Rise of Skywalker, with any yellow lightsabers. You get to see the Jedi guards, or the Jedi Temple guards, who are seen in Star Wars Rebels. They've got yellow lightsabers, they're kind of like Force pikes, but in the High Republic, Republic, yellow lightsabers and different colour lightsabers are quite common. So they manage to defeat the Nihil, and Arathab basically bails. He gets on a speeder and disappears into the distance. However, Q2 does manage to put a tracker onto his speeder, so Sian and Emerick then follow, and they see that Arathab ends up talking to Dr. Uttersound. So that's the end of issue 2, but before I delve into issue 3, a bit of information onto Dr. Uttersound. So Uttersound, his first name is Kizma, so it's Kizma Uttersound, and he is a Chadra-Fan. So Chadra-Fan, they are they're about, I think, 3 or 4 foot tall. They're kind of like bat people, in a way. You see them in the cantina in A New Hope, so they've been around in Star Wars since the very, very start of it. But also they do appear in other Star Wars content. There's a few episodes of the Clone Wars where you get to see them, but they are popping up more and more in the canon. But yeah, just short back kind of people. But Dr. Uttersound is a loyalist to the Nihil, or at least he seems to be that way. He features in the Rising Storm book fairly heavily, and he is also in Light of the Jedi and Out of the Shadows. He is one of the ones who tortured Loden Greatstorm. He is described as kind of sadistic, but he is loyal to Marchion Ro, but also fears Marchion Ro, and he's been the one who's assisted Marchion with transporting the Nameless around the galaxy and finding out more information about them, while also capturing people and torturing them and experimenting on them. Those sort of crazy scientist things. But let's move on to issue number 3. So I want to read out some dialogue from issue number 3, and it starts off with Emerick and Stellan Gios walking on the streets of Coruscant along with Sian, and Sian is talking to them. So Sian says that the way I see it, it's pretty straightforward. And then Emerick says, I think this is the least straightforward case I've ever worked. And then Stellan is like, I'm looking forward to hearing this. So this is what Sian says. If Emerick's right that someone in So's inner circle is compromised and is feeding information to the Nihil about our investigation, and that seems likely for the record, because them getting the jump on the Republic's inside man back on Vorzid was a little too much of a coincidence for me to believe in. And that we're pretty sure that this guy Uttersound is betraying the Nihil with whatever weaponry he's trying to unload. So all we have to do is raise his name in the next update, and one problem should take care of another. Boom. Simple. And Stellan says, the problem is we need information more than we need Uttersound stopped. Sian says, agreed. Whatever he's selling. If it's what did that to Master Loden, we need to know more about it. That weapon, or whatever it is, could bring down the Jedi Order. The entire Republic. I just don't want us to wait until it's too late. And then there's a silence between them, and Stellan Gios and Emerick kind of look at each other, and they get to the entrance of this bar. And Sian says, anyway, it's my first night back on stage. You fellas want to come in and enjoy some music, or do you want to stand out here yammering about all the things that are about to go wrong? Emerick and Stellan look at each other, and then there is a scene change. So the scene change I mentioned goes on to a Nihil ship, and you've got Marchion Ro talking into a comlink to Dr. Uttersound. He is mentioning about betrayal, saying that someone is clearly betraying the Nihil, and Uttersound is claiming to know nothing. After a bit back and forth, then the comms go off, and Marchion Ro tells his fellow Nihil to follow Uttersound, and if it turns out that he is betraying them, as Ro suspects, to torture and kill both him and also the Tarnab that seems to be associated with him. So back to Emerick and Stellan. They are watching Sian play an upbeat version of that strange lullaby as a kind of gotcha thing, and Emerick comments on that because he says, yeah, she's doing this because I keep humming it and singing it around her, and I have been doing over the investigation, so she's kind of doing it to mess with me a little bit. Gios mentions that Emerick and Sian seem to be getting close, and also there's a comment that the song, the nursery rhyme, may be from Dalna. It's a planet that's mentioned a bit in the High Republic, and I'm fairly certain that in the next phase of the High Republic, which is going to be a prequel by 150 years to this phase, I'm fairly certain that a lot more information about Dalna and the Dalnan people is going to get elaborated on, because we just keep getting little breadcrumbs about it. In the book I mentioned, the junior novel A Test of Courage by Justina Ireland, that's probably the most amount of information we get on the Dalnan people, and there's not a huge amount in there, aside from there being some sort of big disaster that occurred that made them scared of leaving their planet. So I think we're going to get that in the second phase of the High Republic, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Then before Stellan and Emerick can talk any further, a communication comes through for Stellan Gios. It's from Avar Chris, confirming there has been an attack. Meanwhile, you've got Uttersound on a Nihil ship, and it is being boarded. Then it shows you on Starlight Beacon, you've got Stellan Gios, Emerick Caphtor, and also Sian Holt looking at Terek and Seret, the Force Bond twins. Now, they have been turned to stone or are calcifying, and this is confirmed in episode 92 of Star Wars Comics in Canon. It's in the third volume of the High Republic Marvel Comics. Issue 11 is specifically when it occurs, and Keeve Trennis is also there, who obviously features in those very heavily. So Sarek and Tarek, they are Force-Bond twins. One of them gets attacked by the Nameless. It starts to turn the other one to stone as well. And so what they do, they split it between them, and then they go into this enforced sleep to kind of cut themselves off from the Force and to stop them being calcified any further. And they're just in the medical bay on Starlight Beacon. Emerick thinks that this may have happened due to a transference in the bloodstream after Sian says that maybe the Force is being used as some sort of conduit to make this happen. And then there's a bit more conversation. Emerick talks to Keeve Trannis and asks if she's doing okay and if she can give him any information. She is still in shock and she is terrified and is very, very upset. So Emerick then gives Keeve a hug. Back to the Nihil, you've got this Nihil ship that gets boarded and they prepare for an attack. Arathab then attacks them and starts to wipe them out with this. He's got this long staff that's got like knives at either end of it that glow with this red stuff. It's kind of like a double-ended vibroblade sort of weapon. Then back on Starlight, you've got the three of them, Stellan, Emerick and Sian, are then walking down a hallway talking that some of the descriptions don't really seem to add up about the Nameless. Emerick mentions it could be hallucinations, and then Stellan Gios then yells at them saying, it definitely wasn't hallucinations, I was there, and then storms off. So Sian and Emerick then pursue him and are like, Stellan, wait. Then you've got a little moment here that I really like. You've got Ram Jomaram who runs past them. And this is a reference because in the High Republic Adventures comics by Daniel José Older, and I tackle this in episode 93 and is in issue 11, there's something called like the Great Jedi Race. And in essence, you've got Padawans running through Starlight Beacon. They do a foot race and whoever wins gets some cakes. It's a really fun little issue. And in the High Republic Adventures comic, you get this moment, but from Ram's perspective. And Ram is a character from Race to Crashpoint Tower, which is once again the book by Daniel José Older, and I love Ram Jomaram. He's one of my favourite characters in the High Republic, and as he runs past he goes, hi Master Stellan, hi Master Emerick, hi pretty lady that I've never seen before, and she's like, hey kid, and then he just runs away. And I just like that. You know, José Older has done a really, really good job of connecting High Republic Adventures to Trail of Shadows to Race to Crashpoint Tower. They all intertwine very, very well. Anyway, after that mild interaction, Stellan Gios then apologises for his outburst. He just says that it's nothing like he's ever felt before, and obviously seeing Jedi die is just incredibly frustrating. And then Avar Kriss appears. Avar Kriss wants to talk to Stellan Gios, so Emerick gets Sian to leave the area. And it's confirmed that Emerick grew up with Avar, Stellan and Elzar Mann. He was the same sort of age as them. All three of them were very good friends, but there seems to have been some friction between them recently, and Emerick just wants to stay out of the way of their complicated history. So it goes back to Arathab. He kills all of those Nihil, and Uttersound shoots two of the Nihil as well. Then a Nihil ship appears, and shortly after that you've got more Nihil boarding the ship. These other Nihil look around, and it's confirmed that a ship that was attached to the ship they're on has just disappeared into hyperspace. All of the Nihil seem to have been killed, but Uttersound is on the floor dying. He's bleeding out very heavily, he's got like claw marks all over him and things, but he is alive. So they come to the Eye, and the Eye says, save him for now, so we can try and get some information out of him to work out what's happened. Then back to Starlight, you've got Emerick who is showing Sian around, takes her to, at the end of the great Padawan race, shows some of the lightsaber dueling and takes her to some of the gardens and things. They then have a really nice conversation, and this is one of the things that I really recommend to all of you listening. Pick up this comic, it's all on Marvel Unlimited, it's a really, really good, interesting read, and there's just some really human connections I enjoy, and this moment is one of them. And the moment is that Emerick says to Sian that he's scared that everyone he cares about, ever, is a Jedi, aside from one person now, and obviously he's pointing at Sian. And he mentions that the Jedi, they're not emotionless, they just have to try and keep their emotions in check. They have to act stoically, and that can be difficult because it doesn't mean you don't feel these things. Because Sian comments on the fact that he hugged Keeve, and she doesn't really see Jedi affection very much, and he's like, well, sometimes it's necessary, and I still love all of these people and care about them deeply. It's just difficult when all this stuff is going on to stay stoic. And Sian responds to that by giving him a hug, and it's just this really nice panel of them just hugging each other, both smiling, and that is where issue 3 ends. So issue 4 starts in a Chadra-Fan settlement. You see Dr. Uttersound go into this home and his family are there, lots of kids and a partner of some sort, and he gives his family some money and then says that he needs to leave. His partner, maybe his wife or something like that, then says to him, we need you to stay, you've only just got here and things. And he's like, look, the money I've given you should cover the debts at the moment and should hopefully cover some medical expenses and maybe even give you some more money so we're set off. What I'm hoping is that the next thing I do will give us the last amount of money, so he'll be set for life, and I can just leave the Nihil and not be involved with them anymore. But while he's going around and doing these things, you've got another Chadra-Fan who's following him, and this is someone called Besar. It's confirmed because they've both got like inner monologues, both Uttersound and also Besar in this moment, and Besar confirms that they lost their partner in a Nihil attack, so they hold the Nihil responsible for these things. And so he was asked by a Jedi, assumably Emerick, to find some information out on Uttersound, and they're trying to follow, but when they get to Uttersound's ship, they're trying to attach a tracker, it doesn't work, so they just get on board. Meanwhile, you've got Emerick and Sian are talking. You've got Sian is playing her piano thing, and Emerick is laying on the sofa next to her. They're just having a little chat, and then they are sent a comm to confirm that there is a lead on Uttersound. So back to Dr. Uttersound. He is conspiring with Arathab via a comm, and then a Nihil comes near him and he turns the comms off. And the Nihil says that they are suspects of Uttersound and say there are even more reinforcements here to make sure that Uttersound doesn't mess up this delivery like he did with the last one. It shows that Emerick, Sian, and a few others are in some Republic starships waiting for the Nihil to appear at a certain location. Then they appear and there's a couple of pages of firefight. It looks really good. Once again, the artwork of this miniseries is excellent. Emerick then locates the ship which has the cargo and potentially Uttersound on it, so he flies near it, shoots on it, and then manages to get into the ship. On the ship itself, you've got the Nihil who are attacking Uttersound, and Uttersound manages to kill them with a gun that he gets, because where the ship they're on is like being damaged and things from the battle, it's like swaying left and right, so the Nihil that was holding a gun to Uttersound drops it, and Uttersound used it to kill them. And Uttersound then goes a bit mad in just for a moment, and he starts shooting the corpse of this Nihil. So he shoots a Nihil and then just keeps shooting him over and over and over again. It's like yelling as he's doing it. And while he's doing this, the Chadra-Fan spy Besar is watching. Emerick then appears by cutting a hole in the ceiling and climbing through, and then he starts to hallucinate quite vividly. It's confirmed that Uttersound opened up a peephole in the cargo, and Emerick collapses. Besar then holds a gun to Uttersound, and then Arathab appears. Besar shoots a stun blast at both of them, which knocks out Uttersound, but Arathab is completely unaffected. So Arathab goes in to try and kill Besar, but then his arm is sliced off by a lightsaber, and it showed that Sian has picked up Emerick's lightsaber. Arathab then runs away with only one arm, and Besar closes the hatch to the cargo that's been causing Emerick problems. Sian then helps Emerick to his feet, and the droid Q2 says that they need to go. The ship is pulling itself apart in this firefight, so we need to leave. So Sian takes Emerick to the ship and says that she'll come back and grab Uttersound, who's passed out on the floor. So obviously in the cargo was those nameless beings, if that wasn't already clear. And then the final panels of issue 4 show that they're on this ship and they're heading to Starlight Beacon, but they get in sight of it and see that it's basically on fire, that an explosion has just happened, and Emerick is still in shock at this point. So my friends, this leads us to the final comic of this series. So this is issue number 5. So issue 5 starts with Sian checking in on Emerick. He's brought out of this weird hallucinogenic nightmare state by her talking to him. There are some internal monologues throughout these comics, and obviously they really help understand the characters, but I'm not going to delve into them specifically, but it shows that Sian deeply cares about Emerick and wants him to be okay. They hug once again, but then Uttersound is there, kind of ruining the moment a little bit. He confirms that he has no loyalty to the Republic or the Nihil or anyone really, he just wants money. Besar then chimes in and says, well, he actually has a family who he's loyal to, he's just trying to cover that up, and is pointing a gun at Uttersound, saying that he had a family too at some point, and that because of the Nihil they're now gone. Uttersound is like panicking at this and says, look, I'm sorry, here the only thing I can give you is this. And it's a little bit of parchment that has some handwritten note on it. And what's written on it is the nursery rhyme that has been referenced prior in this. And I want to clarify that all of the characters there are quite shocked by the fact there's a handwritten note, because if you tell in Star Wars, people don't really seem to write things down, it's always on data pads and etc. Which to me actually sounds like a bit of a pain. I use handwritten notes all the time, and although writing on my phone for notes and things is quite helpful at times, sometimes I just find it's better to write things down, so I'd be interested in that element of Star Wars being explored a bit more. Maybe we'll get it explored in content that goes earlier, maybe even in the next phase of the High Republic. But anyway, tangent aside. So after they note that on this handwritten bit of parchment that it's got that nursery rhyme on it, Uttersound says some stuff, and I thought I'd read it out because it gives a little bit more weight and understanding to these creatures, the Nameless. So this is what Uttersound is saying. The parchment comes from one who was once a Jedi, many years ago. It's about the creatures you seek, the ones the Nihil will use to bring down the Republic, the ones that are about to turn me a massive profit on the black market. Some call them the Sri Karai, Eaters of the Force. To others, they are simply the Nameless. Their mere presence causes madness, hallucinations in Force users. I haven't figured out how yet. The only way to control them is an ancient artifact that was split into 2 pieces, and the eye has both parts. That's how. And then he is cut off by Besar saying, "Come quickly, something's happening to Starlight Beacon." It then shows there's been another explosion on Starlight Beacon and one of the main spires starts to crack. Uttersound confirms that he was there taking a second wave of the Nameless to the beacon, but there's already some on there. So Emerick says that he wants to board Starlight Beacon to get more information on these creatures. Sian confirms that she will go too. So then you see the ship crash through the glass from the main hall. That I believe is what you see from the first issue of the High Republic comics by Marvel, Cavan Scott, when you see Keeve Trennis get knighted. And it's, I think, the second or third printing, like the cover of the second or third printing of that comic itself. You get to see them in there when they do their knighting ceremonies and whatnot. So they crash through there and destroy a lot of the glass and things. And Emerick does confirm that the shields will have gone up as soon as they crash through the glass, so all the air doesn't get sucked out. And then 2 familiar faces pop up, Torben Buck and Quart, 2 characters who are very prominent in the High Republic Adventures comics. And the end of the High Republic Adventures comics that I tackled a couple episodes ago, ends with issue 13 of those comics, doesn't even really go near the Fallen Star. So seeing them here is quite nice to know what actually happens to them. So this is a degree of spoilers, I suppose, for the High Republic Adventures, but it takes place after them, so it's almost like a mini epilogue of that. But yeah, Torben Buck, who is amazing, Buckets of Blood, one of my favourite characters, and Quart, the Eloxian, they are there with a group of younglings. They all board the ship that Emerick and Sian landed on, but Emerick says he wants to investigate further. So Emerick, Sian, the 2 Chadra-Fan, Torben Buck, and Quart go to investigate, because confirmed that Quart actually wounded one of the Nameless beings slightly earlier. So they go into a hallway and Sian sees this giant clawed thing, and Emerick is right next to her while the other ones are slightly further back just to ensure, for safety reasons and things. So Emerick is trying to reach out to the beast with the Force. He is hallucinating quite wildly, but Sian is there to keep him sort of anchored, and because she can see the being for itself, it's not maybe having the same effect on Emerick as it would normally. Also, the beast is seemingly wounded, so maybe that's having an effect too. But Emerick is trying to focus, get through the hallucinations, and trying to reach out to the beast with the Force. It then tries to attack, and Emerick manages to cut its hand off, this big clawed hand. Then Uttersound throws a thermal detonator at this being and seemingly kills it. And then the Nihil that are aboard Starlight Beacon hear from all the commotion and then start to attack. So Emerick, Torben Buck and Quart are then deflecting bolts back with their lightsabers as the rest of them start to retreat. The gang get to their ship, and Sian has actually obtained one of the fingers from the claw of this being, so they can analyse it and try and work out more information about it. But the Nihil are fast approaching. Torben Buck then decides to give Emerick his blood-stained clothes, because he comments that he fell over earlier and fell into the blood of these beings, so they can analyse the blood on his clothing as well as the claw thing that Sian found. And Emerick looks at him a little bit confused, and Torben Buck is just in his underwear now, basically, and he says, "Look, I'm going to go stop the Nihil, because if I don't, they might come and get for this ship. So I've already said my goodbyes to Quart. You need to save him and the younglings, and you need to escape so we can find out what this is. I'll hold the Nihil off." So he runs out, basically naked, with his lightsaber into a hallway. It shows the ship leaves Starlight Beacon, so we haven't heard anything from Torben Buck, so I don't know if he survived. I really, really hope he did, because he's one of my favourite characters, but I think the assumption at this point is that he probably didn't, because you see Starlight Beacon is in flames and is starting to crash down to the nearby planet. But Quart, the younglings, and also Emerick, Sian and Besar are safe. Uttersound seemingly slipped away from them in all the commotion and things, so they don't know if he's alive or not. But Emerick is confident that the knowledge will help them see through this darkness, will bring light, and that Q2 has already started analysing the information they've got about these beings. And the final panel shows all of these people on the ship are looking out to see Starlight Beacon crashing, but Sian has put a hand on Emerick's shoulder, and he is holding her hand there. And that is the end of the Trail of Shadows. So yeah, it was a really interesting read. It gives a bit more information onto the Nameless or the Levelers or whatever one wants to call them, and does give some nice kind of ending to the High Republic adventures in some ways. It's a sad ending, and I wish I hadn't known about Torben Buck. I wish I just was blissfully unaware, but we shall see. What I'm really hoping is that Torben Buck and a character that I won't spoil, but there's a character in The Fallen Star towards the end who you think might have died, but one of the characters is fairly confident that they didn't die, and this other character is also one of my favourite characters. I have a lot of favourite characters in the High Republic, let's be honest. Most of them are my favourite characters, but I'm really hoping that Torben Buck finds this other character and they both survive and we find out in phase 3, but maybe that's wishful thinking. We shall see. But that is the end of the episode for the most part, my friends. Thank you so much for listening, as always. I just want to give yourselves some more information of what's coming up. So I said about it earlier that I still have yet to tackle 3 pieces of High Republic content. I need to do the book review for Mission to Disaster, which is the junior novel by Justina Ireland. I need to do the young adult novel by Daniel José Older, which is called Midnight Horizon. And then I need to do the 2 manga that was released, which were written by Shima Shinya, and volume 1 was Justina Ireland and Shima Shinya, whereas volume 2 is Shima Shinya and Daniel José Older, funnily enough. So I'm going to be tackling probably both volumes of them in one episode, because I remember reading the first volume and it seemed to be about the equivalent of 2, maybe 3 comics. And obviously on Comics in Canon, generally speaking, I try and do a volume a go, but they're quite small volumes, so I think they should fit quite nicely into one episode, but we'll see when I start writing notes. So next week, I think I will not tackle The Edge of Balance. I think I may end up embarking on the first batch of the Crimson Reign comics. So they're going to be the sequel to the War of the Bounty Hunters. So that's Dr. Aphra 2020 run, Vader 2020 run, Star Wars 2020 run, and the only run of Bounty Hunters comics, as well as the mini-series Crimson Reign. So they all take place between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So that's sort of a year between those movies, and there's going to be 3 trilogies. So there's there's going to be 3 batches of comic events. So the first one was War of the Bounty Hunters. I tackled that and all of the companion comics and everything to do with that at the tail end of 2021. There's a whole playlist on YouTube, which is War of the Bounty Hunters, which is the episode I did for that. Then it's Crimson Reign, which, as I said, I'll be tackling soon. And then there's an unknown third one that's probably going to get announced like tomorrow, knowing my luck, after me waffling on about it here, because the Crimson Reign issues, I think the 5th issue is coming out in another month or so. So I presume that'll be when they announce the next sort of the final parts of the comics that take place between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. But I'm going to hopefully tackle those. I still have the final volume of the Poe Dameron comics to do. I've also got some IDW publishing things to do. So there's more Cavan Scott works, which there's the Star Wars Adventures comics. There's Star Wars Adventures Battle Tales, which is some Clone Wars era comics. There's the Tales of Vader's Castle. So I tackled the first batch of those at Halloween. Then there's another 2 of those. So each is like a 5-part story with flashbacks. So each batch of them are 5 issues. There's normally like a running story, and then there's flashbacks, which are like little horror stories. It's kind of an anthology in some ways. So I read the first batch, did them at Halloween, then there's Return to Vader's Castle, and then there's also Ghosts of Vader's Castle. So I'll tackle them at some point soon as well. Plus I've obviously got the 2 High Republic book reviews to go, and then we'll kind of see where we are, because obviously we are middle towards the end of May at the moment, and the next batch of High Republic stuff is coming in October. And between them, we've got the Obi-Wan Kenobi series of comics, which I think is going to be a mini-series. I think it's 5 or 6 issues. And then there's the Han Solo and Chewbacca comics that are ongoing. I think that's going to be like a long series. And that's only on its like 2nd or 3rd issue at the moment. So once that's done, like a full story arc, probably a volume or something, which I imagine will be after the 4th, 5th or 6th comics, then I'll be able to start tackling those as well. But that's just a general idea of what's coming up. I'm also aiming for episode 100 of Star Wars Comics in Canon to do another Q&A episode. So I'll try and make a note to post on social media and ask people, what kind of questions you want me to ask. I'm tempted to get my friend Ben of Star Wars Timeline on the show. So it could be me and Ben talking about the High Republic and Star Wars in general, but also answering questions. So if you have any questions, please email me at starwarscomicsincanon@outlook.com. or message me on any of the social media places at Genuine Chit-Chat on Instagram, Twitter, or on Facebook, or contact Comics in Motion P on all of those same places. Basically, you can contact me in any variety. It will get to me somehow. But yeah, if you want to send those questions in, please feel free. And if you send those questions in, please mention your either Twitter handle or whatever. If you do it on social media, I'll read out your handle. But if you email, you'll need to say what I call you, because I don't want to read out your email address. So that's just a little thing of what's going to happen around episode 100. I mean, it will be for episode 100. It just depends if I'm going to have to fudge it if there's some scheduling issues that I may not be able to make it work in 4 weeks' time. But then again, also, I'm hoping to do a book review between now and then. And I also want to flag to yourselves that I am going to be doing a Kenobi week-by-week discussion show on this feed of Comics in Motion that I will also be uploading to my YouTube channel. So that's going to be much like I did with the Book of Boba Fett, where I'll be hosting and I'll have a different array of guests each episode. But with the Kenobi show, there are 6 episodes, but the first 2 episodes are dropping on a Friday, which is May 27th. So I think myself and Megan are going to watch those episodes and record our thoughts on those 2. And then after that, we'll be doing the week by week of episodes 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I've already started planning those things. So make sure you either subscribe to my YouTube channel or to Comics in Motion, and you'll be able to get those. Or just follow me on social media because I will undoubtedly be posting about them. But aside from that, my friends, rate, review, subscribe, share this on social media with your friends, tell people about it. You don't have to have read a single Star Wars comic, or even as long as you've seen some Star Wars movies, people can listen to this show. That's the general gist. Ideally, the main 11, you watch the Star Wars movies, the main 9, and then also Solo and Rogue One. I would highly recommend that, but people don't have to have done that. As long as you have an interest in Star Wars, you can enjoy the show, and please just share it with as many people as you can, because the more the merrier. And aside from that, I'll say, please consider checking out my Patreon, patreon.com/genuine Chit-Chat. I already gave a little plug earlier on, but for as little as £1 a month, you get access to hours and hours of additional content. A lot of it is Star Wars related, a lot of it is not Star Wars related. Star Wars book reviews on there I don't release anywhere else, some Legends book reviews I don't release anywhere else, and then some non-Star Wars things. There's indie movies me and Megan talk about, there's road trips we go on, there's a holiday, I went to Malta and spoke about that for like 40 minutes. So if you want just a better insight into my life and what I get up to, as well as loads of additional content, and you want to support the show, please consider checking out patreon.com/genuine Chit-Chat. But that's enough from me, my friends. Thank you as always for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you. I will talk to you next Saturday, and as always, may the Force be with you. The intro for Star Wars Comics in Canon is arranged by myself, Mike Burton, and the backing music was made by Eric Matias of soundimage.org.
You have just experienced host, creator, everything elser of Genuine Chit-Chat, and also the host and creator of Star Wars Comics in Canon, found on the Comics in Motion podcast, Mike Burton.